God made the world and all its wonders for man to explore. And there are countless wonders just outside your front door. Now join natural world photographer and journalist Roger W. Downs as he shares the stories of the people, places, music, and cuisines he has discovered as we explore with RWD.
Hey, welcome in again. I'm Roger W. Downs, and today we are going to jump in and get wet with some adrenaline-pumping adventures just outside of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Typically, when you think of the southern chain of the Appalachian Mountains, thoughts of wildlife, beautiful mountain views, majestic waterfalls, hiking, and camping come to mind. However, just across Lake Fontana is the Nantahala National Forest, which is home to some amazing whitewater rafting fun at the Nantahala Outdoor Center. Yeah, try to say that 3 times fast. So let's just call them NOC for short. So when thoughts of whitewater rafting come to mind, you may think, who came up with this sport anyway? Casting yourself into the rapids? Well, our guest today, NOC Director of Outpost Operations, Stephen Foy, or better known to his friends and staff as Foy, answers that.
The sport of rafting really began from folks that were whitewater enthusiasts that were learning to canoe and kayak whitewater, figuring out a way to share it with folks that didn't have that same skill set. And from my understanding, the original whitewater rafts really were military surplus boats that they had used from launching off of like ocean carriers to get to shore. You know, a lot of times they were using like an inflatable boat, and some of those were converted to be some of the first whitewater rafts.
And just for point of clarification, according to whitewatercolorado.com, whitewater rafting goes back as far as 1842 when Lieutenant John Fremont began exploring the Colorado River with his friend Horace Day, and they kind of put together a makeshift rubber raft. And since then, they have certainly developed and continued to improve upon that design.
People are still designing boats and modifying boat designs all the time. But I think that as they kind of had some of those big, heavy, clunky military-grade boats, they started to figure out that they could change the design to be more apt for whitewater use. And then part of the reason the sport started and evolved was because with either more power in your boat, being a heavier boat and a stronger boat with several people in it, you could address rivers in a different way than you would in a canoe or a kayak. And so some things get easier, some things get harder, you know. So that's kind of where it started. And I'm not, NOC started in 1972. There were only a handful of companies that started the year to 3 before us, sprinkled across the country. But realistically, it was around that time, once outfitters started to make it kind of a thing that could be done in volume with the public, is about when the sport kind of picked up notoriety in the States. So it was kind of in that early 70s that it started to become a thing. One of the things that really spawned us to see commercial success, which I think also then created more prevalence for the sport, was actually the movie Deliverance. It just gave people the awareness that running a river was a thing you could do for recreation. And so really in the early 70s is when you start to see the technology, the social awareness, and the available skill set for commercial operations all come together to make it something publicly available. And then as a sport, it's become something that people compete in internationally.
And I find that really fascinating how pop culture influences the great outdoors, like Deliverance did for whitewater rafting. And if you've never seen the movie Deliverance, starring Jon Voight, Burt Reynolds, Ned Beatty, and Ronnie Cox, it's an adventure thriller about 4 gentlemen from the city who go out on a canoe trip, which turns graphically violent. And they have to escape down some whitewater rapids, which is a good portion of the movie, to escape their tormentors. And if you've never seen Deliverance, I would not suggest watching it as a family fun night film. But let's get back to Foy. What do you say? So what skill level should a new-bound adventurer have before they go out for the first time whitewater rafting?
As outfitters, we see people every day that have no experience, no skill set to get on the river. And that's really the value of going with an outfitter, is you don't have to have any background whatsoever. We've got all the equipment. We prefer that you show up in appropriate clothing with appropriate footwear. But we've even, river and venue appropriate, take people that aren't confident swimmers. We can get them on the river and they can have a great time. I think that probably the skill set that they should show up with is their ability to kind of come with a great attitude. Say, hey man, I'm here, whether I've got any experience or not, but I'm here to have fun. And if the guy says to do something, I'm willing to do that thing, knowing that it's in my best interest. And now there are some places where, as you get to a more advanced river, it is beneficial to have gone rafting before, so that you know what the balance points are in a raft, because it's very different than sitting in a car or even riding a bicycle. It's a very dynamic ride. As you can imagine, a raft doesn't have brakes. So even when you try to stop, the boat still has motion and the river's still in motion. So coming to a full stop doesn't ever really happen until you're on shore. So kind of having that muscle memory, as you would say it, of like, okay, yeah, the boat just kind of moves around funny, different than any other vehicle I've been in, is helpful when you get into more challenging rapids. But realistically, unless an outfitter tells you otherwise, showing up with no skill set and no experience typically is okay. As a guide, sometimes I honestly kind of prefer folks that don't have experience, because I get to build off of what other expectations are and create a new experience for them, rather than trying to catch up with the last amazing thrill they had. It's almost easier to beat somebody's expectation of 0 than to be like, well, last time I had a 10. What are you going to do that's better than that? I'm like, oh man, I don't know.
Well, maybe now you're starting to think that whitewater rafting sounds kind of fun. Maybe it's something the family and I should do. But there's a few more things you should know before you go. Like, what is a classification of the river that you're going to set out on?
Yeah, so when we talk about rapid classification, we call it class 1, class 3, class 5, and the typical classification system goes class 1 to class 5. And I say typical because there are some places in the world where they have a different system. And even here in the States, the Grand Canyon is a 1 through 10 scale specific to that river. But that class 1 through class 5 kind of is the standard. And there's pretty much two things that will determine the classification system. The first one is the difficulty of navigating the rapid. How much skill does it require to make specific maneuvers to make a clean run from top to bottom? And then the second one is the consequences of if you fall out. There are some rapids that are terribly, terribly difficult to run in a boat. But if you fall out, realistically, not that consequential. And then conversely, there's some rapids that are actually pretty easy to run. The lines are pretty open. They're not too congested. You don't have to make a bunch of tight turns or, technical maneuvers or whatever. But if you fall out, there could be a river feature that's very dangerous. And so either of those things could bump up or downgrade the classification. And the risk, the consequences of swimming will immediately upgrade a rapid. So there are several rapids that will have a dangerous water feature, like a hydraulic or a foot entrapment or something like that, where the river is relatively easy to navigate, maybe a straight line, maybe 1 or 2 small turns to make it run through the rapid. But if you fall out, then it could be consequential, and that's when rapid's upgraded.
So, Foy, I'm familiar with those other terms, but what is a hydraulic exactly? When I think hydraulics, I'm thinking about big equipment tearing up earth or putting together a skyscraper.
So a hydraulic is a river feature where, if you imagine water's moving downstream and there are rocks that kind of like scattered along the riverbed, as water pours over a rock, it will hit the bottom, and then all that force, the water slows down. It just went from being unimpeded to now flowing over something and hitting the bottom. So that water starts to slow down and back up. And as that water slows down and backs up, it creates a backflow, kind of like a washing machine. It creates a backflow where the water is actually now flowing back upstream to fill in that void where the momentum has slowed down. And so that's like kind of like recirculating water behind the obstacle, the rock in this case, is what we call a hydraulic. And in river terminology, we call it a hole. Mm-hmm. And it's those can be particularly dangerous depending on the shape of them. They can be really retentive, to where something that's relatively buoyant can get in there and can get kind of held into that recirculating water and tough to get out. And then some of them are amazingly playful. They're really fun. You jump in and they just kind of slow you down and push you downstream, and it's all about, and that's what a guide really does for you as somebody who's coming to a river with no experience, is they're able to read the river. Over time, you learn to read the river the way that a musician would look at sheet music, and And that's kind of, you can look at a hydraulic and be like, yeah, that one's worth kind of tangling with. It's not going to be a big deal. Or like, oh no, we're going to avoid that one. It's all situational for sure, but there certainly are hydraulics that can be very dangerous. And there's even situations where canoes, kayaks, and rafts can surf a hydraulic with a similar concept of surfing a wave on the ocean, where you've got that water that's pushing back upstream and you've got the water coming downstream, and the combination of those forces, you can surf a boat using those features, and it's really fun, you know. And there's certain situations where a hydraulic can be really friendly, and even if you fall out, it'll just push you downstream. But it's all situational. It's all about kind of reading the cues and the force of the water and the volume of it. And you know, it's like I said, it's kind of like reading sheet music, where it's like, okay, that one's a little different than this other note that I saw, but I know how to play it.
So when someone books a trip to go whitewater rafting with the Nantahala Outdoor Center, what kind of classifications are they going to be hitting during their adventure?
We have everything 1 to 5, and even our Class 5 operations. It's pretty rare that we're running them in Class 5 conditions. Most of them are going to be graded up to Class 5 once we get into certain water levels. And we typically, when we get into situations where we're seeing Class 5, we make very concerted decisions around whether we are or not going to run that day. But for the most part, we're Class 1 to Class 4. And our Class 1 operations typically are rental operations down in Atlanta. Pretty much any of our guided operations are going to be a Class 2 to Class 4 experience.
Okay.
So the Nantahala is a Class 2 river. The last rapid on the Nantahala Falls, is a Class 3. And, you know, we do rent boats on the Nantahala to the public. And for many folks, that's their first Class 3 rapid. It was my first Class 3 rapid. And there's a great opportunity there to pull your boat aside of the river, get out and go look at the rapid. As a private boater or as a rental guest, and look at the rapid before you run it, make the decision, do I want to run this or not? And if you don't, you can walk right around it, tell us like, hey, we left our raft up there above the falls. And we're like, great, we'll go get it for you. And so guests have the option of making that decision of like, hey, Class 3 is or is not good for me, you know?
Right.
And we're like, today I'm not ready, but maybe tomorrow. And then with a guide, it gives everybody that chance to kind of have a really great Class 3 crescendo to a really amazing Class 2 river experience.
But what if a major storm system comes through? Would that change the classification on the river as the water surged into the valley?
Correct. And you very rarely would have a Class 1 jump to a Class 5, simply because a Class 1, you would think about kind of flat moving water, you know, and without any obstacles or any major hazards in the river. The only thing that would really make it a Class 5 at that point is if new hazards are introduced in the river by flood or by runoff. So I can imagine in a situation, if you're familiar with downtown Asheville, if you think about the Asheville stretch of the French Broad, wide open, slow moving, no real obstacles other than like some bridge pylons. But if we had a major flood and all of a sudden new trees were introduced in the middle of the river that have a bunch of branches and sticks and they're pretty dangerous, and now you've got high water, and it's like maybe running across the entire river and there's not a clean path through it really, I would call that Class 5. You know, we just went from Class 1 to Class 5 with new hazards, new water levels, all that kind of stuff. So typically you're going to go up or down by one classification scale with water levels.
So the question really becomes, how do you know if the river is running too high to put in that day? Stephen Foy, Director of Outpost Operations for the Nantahala Outdoor Center, will answer that next.
Don't wander off now. Explore with RWD will be right back after this.
Hey, Roger W. Downs here again, and I want to thank you for listening to the Explore with RWD podcast. But did you also know that I'm a natural world photographer? In other words, I go out and capture landscapes and wildlife and all the creations that God has put upon the planet, and I love to share those with you. And if you're looking for art for your home, I have that available for you too. Just visit RogerWDownsPhotography.com. You can find the link in the description of this podcast.
Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
Our guest again today is Stephen Foy, or better known as Foy to his friends and co-workers, the Director of Outpost Operations, the Nantahala Outdoor Center, which specializes in whitewater rafting adventures. Now, we were just talking about the different classifications of a river, but how do you know if it's safe or not to put in after a major storm system?
Most rivers in America have a flow gauge on them, and those are typically managed by the U.S. Geological Survey. So you're looking for a USGS gauge, and you can access the lion's share of those are accessible on the internet. Most of them have real-time data. And then there's a great resource through American Whitewater. American Whitewater is a nonprofit organization that advocates for access to rivers for the public for recreational use. And they have a great website that compiles all that data, puts it into graphs, and you can even look up regional data. And it kind of even has a green, yellow, red scale that indicates, based off of recreational use, where the ranges are of too low, optimal flows, or too high for the average paddler.
And for point of reference, that website is AmericanWhitewater.org, or you can find the link to that website in the description of this podcast.
So a lot of it comes from socialized knowledge. People that have been out there on the rivers and have recorded their river experiences and have, kind of like reported back utilizing databases like American Whitewater's website or other regional sources to kind of have a socialized knowledge of saying, hey, that river is at flood stage at this level and these rapids are unrunnable, or hey, I saw at this level, I wouldn't run it, here's what I saw, and then people maybe go try, or incident reports in the past. So each river is very unique. Some rivers actually get easier to run as the water level goes up because things are now underwater and the surface of the water, becomes a little bit smoother. That's when things get quote unquote flushed out. So there's sometimes where it's like, hey, that river that's usually really fun and challenging, with too much water, it's like, man, it's just a flat water run now, not even fun anymore. Right. That's not the case at all rivers, but every river behaves differently and uniquely as water levels go up and down. And so part of it is having that socialized knowledge. Part of it's having access to those resources. And then for most commercially run rivers across the country, there's going to be a permit system in place. And that permit is regulated by the Forest Service, the Park Service, the state, the county, some agency. And then within either the operating plan or the permit system, typically, this isn't standard across all permits, but typically there's going to be, for a commercial operation, a range that they're allowed to operate in. And in some rivers, it even determines, hey, at this range, you have to put in and take out at specific spots, or your boat sizes have to change or whatever. Each river, because they're all so unique, the permits will kind of dictate that. And so for us, we've got some cutoff levels at our operations where we'll even give our guests a heads up, say, hey, just so you know, we're anticipating rain and we're getting close to our cutoff level. There's a chance that your trip tomorrow might not go because of rain. Just want to give you the heads up. We're going to make a final decision in the morning when we see what the actual water and weather conditions are like. Because water levels can change very quickly. And yeah. And then there's a lot of places, think like the Nantahala and the Ocoee, for example, where the river itself is actually dam controlled for a hydropower dam. And in those cases, we have a pretty good level of confidence that most days we're going to be at a specific water level. And it makes it really viable for us to run a business and for guests to know what the experience that they should expect will be. But even on those dam release rivers, the dam can't hold back all the runoff that comes in downstream of the dam. Sometimes the dam has to release extra water so that they maintain lake levels, all that kind of stuff. So, even in places where we have confidence from a dam, that we still need to keep an eye on what the water levels are doing. And again, that's very specific to each river. If I think about a river like the Ocoee or the Nantahala, the water's either on or off. And so when the water's off at the Nantahala, makes for great trout fishing. There's small pools. There's still a minimum flow that has to run so that they can maintain, livable conditions for the natural species that live there. But then when they turn the dam on, it's like, yeah, okay, now it's actually navigable by boat. So we're looking at the dam release schedule. And then there's some where people are looking at the dam release to see if it's within recreational levels. And the Chattahoochee is a great example of that. The Chattahoochee has a major system of dams. And then they're going to release water based off of electric needs within the city of Atlanta, and what Alabama and Florida, who draws off the Chattahoochee, also need for electric power generation. And so people will look at that schedule and be like, okay, they're released now, but that water's not going to reach me for 12 hours because I'm so far downstream. I know that when the water gets down there, then it's time to go paddle. But for right now, it's a dry riverbed, Yeah. So it's both. Someone's like, okay, the water's releasing really high right now. As soon as it starts to cut down, then I know that it's going to be back at the level that I like to go out there and play at.
So let's talk about safety. Is there a checklist people should run down before they set out to go whitewater rafting?
With a commercial guest, we make sure on most of our trips that we have everybody wears a PFD, a life jacket, personal flotation device, PFD. And then on most of our guided trips, everybody wears a helmet. The only place where that's the exception is on the Nantahala, where they're not required. But even for a ducky rental or rentals guest, we always recommend that people would wear one, and anybody who ever wants to, we'll provide a helmet for them. And then, for a commercial outfitter, we do a pretty good job across the country. Outfitters do a good job of making sure that their equipment typically is in good repair. We do a really good job of inspecting our boats and our equipment, making sure that everything is up to snuff. But you want to make sure that your equipment is ready to go out and be utilized in whitewater, And then for kayakers and canoers, they kind of have a checklist of what they do. For a kayaker, they kind of have what they call the 5 essentials, and kind of head to toe. It's a helmet, a PFD, a paddle, a boat, and for a kayaker, a spray skirt, which is a neoprene decking that they wear that connects their waist to the boat, that they can then keep water from splashing into the kayak, but also make a quick exit if they have to. But that's specific to kayakers. That's not for rafters. For raft guests, really want guests to show up in clothing that's appropriate for the weather. Typically not cotton, and then with shoes that are appropriate to stay on your feet. We don't want people wearing flip-flops. We don't want you wearing cowboy boots or rain boots. We'd prefer, if you have some athletic sandals like a Chacos or a Keen, something like that, Tevas, or if you have some old running shoes that you don't mind getting wet and muddy potentially. And then if it's going to be cool, wear some long sleeves, stuff you wear to the gym. Typically it's going to be perfect for a river. And that's probably the main thing. And then once people show up to us, we'll outfit them with a life jacket and a helmet. And, if it's going to be windy that day, we typically have like a splash jacket, which isn't going to keep you dry, but it'll keep you warm. And in some certain cases, we have neoprene wetsuits if it's going to be particularly cold that day, or if the water's cold, put people in a wetsuit. And if oftentimes the days that we're wearing the wetsuits are some of the best days on the river. It's going to be spring or fall. And in those days is when like the things are blooming or new colors are happening. There's typically less traffic. So if I know that guests are put on a wetsuit, typically that means it's going to be an awesome day on the river,
Oh,
so
cool.
sometimes, people are like, oh, it's cold, should we go rafting? It's like, man, you're going to warm up. Those wetsuits are you're going to get your body temperature up working, and you're not going to see a bunch of other folks on the river. Those spring and fall trips really are kind of magical. The weather's warm to kind of cool. It can be a fantastic time to be on the river. Late September, early October, some of my favorite times to be on the river. The leaves start to change. There's typically a little less river traffic. And, with the guided operation specifically, you got to think that your guides have now been guiding regularly for 3 to 4 months at that point. They're really, they're in that guide mentality that is really smooth and polished at that point. Even a seasoned veteran guide in the spring is kind of shaking the rust off, so to speak. Whereas in October, they've got it dialed in.
Honestly, I never thought of that. Taking in the fall foliage of the mountains from a whitewater raft trip sounds like something I might have to sign myself up for. But since we know your favorite season now, Foy, what is your favorite river that you take people out on?
Each of us kind of has our own favorite for different reasons. And my personal favorite probably is the Ocoee. And the reason I would say the Ocoee is that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I spent the most time guiding. And the Ocoee is just a playground for a whitewater enthusiast. I go out there and I still learn new stuff, and I still see moves that I've never made before. And I still go try old things, and they're as hard as they were the first day I did them. The Ocoee is just a great playground. But each of the rivers brings something special that none of the others can provide, and like the Chattooga is a wild and scenic river, and it's just amazingly beautiful. It's been protected, and it will be protected forever. And it's an experience that you don't really get elsewhere in the Southeast. The Chattahoochee, you leave our outpost, you go under 285, the main perimeter around Atlanta. You go around the corner, and then it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. You don't see or hear the highway traffic. You don't see or hear any urban sprawl. I've been on the Chattahoochee in the heart of Atlanta, and I've seen bald eagles and deer and otters. Yeah, and it's like, man, that's a really unique experience in the heart of a major city, And it's like, how do I compare that against anything else? I guess the real answer to that question is my favorite river is whichever one I'm on that day.
All right, that's a fair answer. I'll give you that. But let's take out all the rivers that you guide on out of that question and ask it again. Across the nation, which is your favorite river to go whitewater raft?
It's hard not to say the Colorado River that runs through the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is just such a uniquely American experience and landscape. You got to think it's 280 miles roughly. And the Yosemite Valley, I think, is about 13 miles. So you're thinking you're getting the equivalent of about 20 Yosemite valleys as you go down the Grand Canyon, and you're seeing these canyon walls that are very intricate. You look up and be like, oh yeah, look at that wall. And then you stop and you stare at it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a bighorn sheep. And then you look a little more, you're like, well, I'll be daggone. There are 20 bighorn sheep that I didn't even see until I stopped to really focus and look at it. And the experience of the Grand Canyon is just so magical. And it's something that we can't replicate here in the Southeast by any means, but you can be out there, and a commercial trip can go down the Grand Canyon in about 6 days on a motorboat, or you can go down it in about 22 days on a private trip. And everything in between is just wonderful, So it's a unique experience that I've been fortunate to have, and I'm looking at another one and just cherish that space. And then, yeah, I think that's one of my favorites. Then the Youghiogheny up in Pennsylvania is really a great river as well. There's a lot of fun to be had on the Youghiogheny.
Yeah, that's a really pretty river as well. But speaking about the Grand Canyon, I really need to get out there. I had a whole trip paid for and planned to go. And unfortunately, about 3 weeks before I was supposed to head on out that way, I fell down a set of stairs and broke my ankle. Just my luck. But when bad luck does happen out on the river in your whitewater rafting, such as you fall out of the raft, what should you do?
So at the beginning of any commercial river experience, the trip leaders and the river guides will conduct a pre-trip orientation speech, and at NOC that includes a little video that we show to everybody. And typically if you fall out from your boat, you're still right next to the boat. So the first thing is, especially in a raft, just like reach up and somebody in the raft and pull you back in, or grab a hold of a handle or a side rope that goes along the boat, and then folks can pull you back in. That's typically the thing. If you fall out, chances are you're still moving at the same speed. You didn't jump that far. You're just right there, get you back in. However, if you do drift away, especially in a raft, you can reach your paddle back up to the folks in the boat, or they can reach a paddle out to you, pull you back in pretty quickly, get you back in the boat, no big deal. And then there are certain situations where every raft guide will carry what we call a throw rope on our boat. And there's certain situations where it's either a common that folks would swim, or there are particularly dangerous river features or whatever that we want to make sure we can grab folks out of the water pretty quickly. And so we'll post up a boat in specific spots with a rope ready on a bank to be able to toss a rope to some folks to kind of fish them back into shore. And but all that comes with the guides they're talking about it. They're going to give you the orientation before the trip. They're going to give you a preparation before you go into a rapid. The guides are giving you that information continuously as you go down the river. So I think the main thing is, if you are separated, is to kind of just stay calm and like check out your surroundings, figure out what's going on. Oh, the boat is still right there. I can spend much less energy, go ahead and get myself back in the boat than freaking out about it, or like, hey, the guide said that there's going to be a rope on River Right. Rather than freaking out, look over River Right and see if that guide's there and what he's telling me to do. And typically your raft guide is going to be kind of acting like a swim coach. You might be 2 or 3, kick strokes away from the boat. Like, hey man, just swim back over to the boat. If you just do that, they can get you back in pretty quickly, And so a lot of that education comes at the beginning of your trip.
Well, what happens if you're going out to take on the rapids by yourself or with a group of friends and you don't have a guide? What safety measures do you need to take to protect yourself? Foy will discuss that coming up next.
Don't go too far. Explore with RWD. We'll be right back.
Natural world photographer Benjamin Walls.
When I was in Alaska at one stage taking photographs of the grizzly bears on the Alaskan Peninsula, there was a bear that came out of the weeds, these really high grass actually, just beside of me, and he was roaring and running right at me.
Be inspired by this story and others from Benjamin Walls in Episode 7 of Explore with RWD.
That wasn't too bad now, was it? Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
So far we've talked about going on a guided adventure with an outfitter like Nantahala Outdoor Center and having a great time whitewater rafting. But what happens if you plan on going by yourself? Should you go by yourself, or should you always have a buddy with you? Again, Stephen Foy, Director of Outpost Operations for the Nantahala Outdoor Center.
Yeah, absolutely. The recommendation always is to never go alone, always to go with a buddy. And then I think that for folks that are going out for their first time, the best bet, honestly, is to get some professional instruction. And NOC provides, we have a world-class canoe and kayak instruction program. Obviously, I'd recommend ours. But getting some instruction is really going to help you learn the language. Somebody's going to help you understand the body mechanics of being in a boat, the body mechanics of using a paddle, what to do when you do flip over, how to learn to roll a kayak back over or how to swim out from it gracefully. All those things. Instruction really is key in a sport like whitewater kayaking. But yeah, so if somebody's going not necessarily whitewater paddling, but they're going out for the first time, I still think that there are some great resources online for folks to access before they get on the water. The Coast Guard provides some stuff. There's safety afloat is one of the key terms that you can study that folks will just kind of talk about. Make sure you have a properly fitting PFD. Having a good PFD, a life jacket, is going to be one of the main things that will prevent major accidents or turning minor accidents into major accidents. And wearing it, that's one of the key things. I wear a PFD on the water all the time. If I'm on the water, I'm wearing a PFD, no matter the grade of the water. It's just one of the key things that will help protect the quality of your experience for sure, and making it as safe of a practice as possible. And then knowing your equipment. Like you said, you have a boat that's not a whitewater boat, but knowing that boat, knowing how to get in and out of it safely, knowing how to balance that boat, knowing your comfort level with it, knowing the kind of boats of different designs will turn differently, they'll go different speeds, all that stuff. So just kind of getting comfortable with your equipment before you really go out and start trying to chase down birds. Okay, I'm gonna take this boat on a flat water first, and then I'll take it on moving water.
So just like anything else that you plan on doing on your own out in nature, it is best to take baby steps first, learn how to walk, and then you can start to run. But Foy, what are some of the most biggest misconceptions that people have about whitewater rafting that you've heard?
But I think one of the incorrect assumptions is that outfitters are going to play up that level of risk. Outfitters, we're in the business of mitigating risk. We're going to do whatever we can to make the operation as fun as possible. And that often means making sure that people have appropriate equipment, all that stuff. But so one of the incorrect assumptions is that it's just too dangerous to do, when in reality, if it was too dangerous to do, we wouldn't have a viable business. I think one of the other incorrect assumptions is that you're kind of out there on your own, when in reality, rafting kind of is a team sport. When we send out a trip, we're going to send out several boats together typically. And so you're kind of keeping an eye on each other. Again, I think maybe one of the incorrect assumptions might be that you have to have some experience to go, when in reality, outfitters take folks with no experience all the time. And like I said earlier, we love taking folks out on the river for the first time. It's one of our great passions. One of the big questions that a lot of people ask is how many people fell out? And it's well, it's not about how many people fell out. It's about how many people really had a great time, And I think people will get a little bit wrapped up in the risk of the activity as being the thing that kind of holds them back. When in reality, one of the greatest elements is the more that the guests lean into the experience, the more that they engage with the raft guide, the more that they really dig their paddle in, the better of a trip they have. It really is one of those things where the more that the guest puts into it, the more that they get out of it, rather than if they hold on to their hesitations and their anxieties, which are legitimate. I don't want to downplay any hesitations or anxieties, but if you let that be your personal tone as the guest going through the whole experience, that's going to be your focus. Whereas if you're okay, I'm going to lean on the equipment, I'm going to trust the guide, I'm going to really lean into this experience and have fun, those are the folks that really have some of the best river experiences.
But let's say you want to get a little bit more in depth and learn how to whitewater raft. Does the Nantahala Outdoor Center provide those kind of classes? And if they do, how do people go about getting signed up for that?
Specific to rafting, we have a week-long raft guide school program that we run in the spring. We start in late February and run that through April. And that raft guide school is primarily focused on those that want to come work for an outfitter during the summer as a raft guide. Hopefully most of them will come to us. we do use it as kind of an employment vetting system. Most of the folks that will go through our guide school will be applying to work with us, but we get a ton of folks every year that are doing it as a vacation. They'll do it like, oh, this is a really cool way for me to just go spend a week on the river, hang out with some like-minded folks and gain some new skills that I'm going to use in my personal life. And then there's some other folks that are like, hey, rafting and whitewater kind of scare me. And this is a way for me to go dip my toes in with a pretty good safety net to figure out if this is something I want to do. Do I want to buy a boat? Do I want is this a sport I want to share with my kids? Here's a way for me to go learn that. So that raft guide school really is probably the best way specific to rafting. And there are several outfitters that will offer that across the country. Ours is fantastic. And then we offer at NOC, we also offer wilderness medicine courses. So think of your basic first aid that you would get from American Red Cross or American Heart Association or one of those entities. We take that same content and we focus it on being in the outdoors and being in a remote setting, probably like more than 30 minutes away from a road or getting to a hospital, kind of what to do if you are out with limited resources, how to kind of make sure that you can respond to a medical situation, however great or small it might be. We have a fantastic school. We partner with an agency called Solo, Stonehearth Outdoor Learning Opportunities, and we're the Southeast headquarters for Solo. So we have a whole department, a whole facility and program developed to training medical and wilderness medicine.
And let me just insert here real quick. If you're planning on going out on the open trail or down a river or even camping, you should probably take that medical course at the Nantahala Outdoor Center or find one close to you no matter where you're at. It is important. Doesn't matter if you're going for a day hike or if you're going out for a week into the forest, you know how to treat a medical emergency if it should happen.
And then again, we've got a world-renowned canoe and kayak instruction program. So for folks who might want to be, like you said, more specific to like a solo boat, getting into a smaller boat, running the boat yourself, going and learning some of those. We do everything from never been in a boat before, day one beginner lesson, all the way up to expert level techniques. We'll spend a whole day focusing on one paddle stroke, how to refine the forward stroke or how to do a specific surfing skill or something like that. We can do everything in between. And even our paddling school and even our programs in Atlanta, we do youth-based week-long camp programs. And so some of those are great where you can take a young teen and put them on our programs in Atlanta, and they're going to get exposure to rafts, kayaks, stand-up paddleboards, canoes, all in 1 week. Give them a really good taste of getting on water. Same thing in our paddling school. We have a kids camp, 5 days of kids getting out, learning whitewater sports, and then on the final day, the parents get to join, and it really is amazing. So we can kind of find typically some educational experience for what most folks are looking for to get outside.
Okay, you've got me convinced. I need to go whitewater rafting at the Nantahala Outdoor Center sometime in October, preferably. But what will my family and I experience when we come to NOC?
So overall, when you go rafting with NOC, what you should experience is an attempt at personalized customer experience. We're going to attempt to meet whoever our guests are face to face. Hey, welcome. We're glad you're here. What kind of experience do you have? And we're going to try to take within the volume of people going that day and try to deliver a personalized experience to the best of our ability. And a lot of that comes down to having a guide with you in the boat who's going to learn your name, kind of learn a little bit about your life story, and try to create the experience around you. To a certain extent, we want to create a rafting experience around the guest while inviting the guest into the rafting experience. To a certain extent, the raft goes down the same river, put into takeout. So there's an element of that the guest needs to experience, but the guest wants to have their own personal experience as well, and that's what we really strive for at NOC, is that the guest feels like they're being catered to, even though they may be one of a few hundred guests that we take down the river that day. They feel like they're the only ones, or that they've got a really great interaction. Suppose you brought a family of 12 or 15 and we've got you spread across 3 boats. We're going to do our best to make sure that y'all are still having interaction amongst each other, even though you're in different boats, that kind of thing. And then I think that one of the things that really sets NOC apart, especially at our Nantahala operations, is the ambiance that you get from the riverside experience. You take out, we've got a restaurant there, we've got retail operations there, you're in a beautiful setting, and that the river experience is part of your overall adventure that you're going to have that day. That you can get off of a river and go for a hike, go for a zip line, have a great meal by the river, all that kind of stuff. That the expectation is that the the river experience is one part of the overall experience that you're having that day. NOC really embraces that. And then hopefully one of the things that you experience with us is that just that same thing is that one river trip is one step in a lifelong of adventure, that you either get inspiration that day to maybe go on another rafting trip, maybe to go take a kayak lesson, or that you saw a trail off the river, like, hey, I want to come back and not even get on the river, but just go hike up that trail to the top of the mountain and see this river valley in a way that I didn't get to see from the bottom when I was in the raft. They're hoping that you're going to get some inspiration for the next adventure experience.
Okay, so I'm excited. I'm getting ready to bring my kids on down to the Nantahala Outdoor Center. We're going to jump on a raft, head on down the Nantahala River, have a blast. But is there an age limit? Because I have kids all the way from 27 to 11.
Great question. So each of our rivers has an age minimum. The Nantahala, the minimum, I believe, is 7. And then, it's all dependent on the river. So some of our age minimums are as high as 12 years old or 13 years old. And then some, like at the Chattahoochee, we'll let kids go on the water that are as young as 5. On the Pigeon, we actually do a guided trip where the minimum age is 3 on the lower Pigeon. And that's a fantastic family experience. Get kids out and excited about whitewater early on. It's really fun. There's lots of swimming and splashing, and we have water guns and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really fun, playful experience for kids to get comfortable in a river environment. So it really fluctuates. And so if you have any questions, our website answers with that minimum age for each of our rivers, and our reservations office can help find that as well.
So I know the question you're asking, how do I get in touch with NOC?
One of the key ways is just go to our website, www.noc.com. You can also call our 1-800 number, 1-800-232-RAFT. All of our reservationists are very knowledgeable about all of the different adventures we offer, can answer any question you've got, or if not, put you in touch with somebody who can.
Well, thank you, Foy. I really appreciated your time today. Again, Stephen Foy, the Director of Outpost Operations for the Nantahala Outdoor Center, which offers whitewater rafting in the Nantahala National Forest, just south of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So feel free to make a whole day of it in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the Explore with RWD podcast. It really means the world to me to have your support. And don't forget that I'm also a natural world photographer, so I'm always out shooting landscapes and wildlife. And you can certainly go check out some of my art and purchase it for your home if you'd like. I sell everything from large wall pieces to coffee mugs. It's all online, rogerwdownsphotography.com. And by the way, all the links we mentioned here in this podcast today are in the description, including my website and the different places you can find me online and how to get yourself booked in with the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And by the way, if no one else has told you this yet today, I love you, and I know the good Lord above loves you. He's promised you that, so make sure to count your blessings. And it doesn't matter what you've done, He will forgive you. All you need to do is ask. So until next time, peace, love, and coon dogs, y'all.
Thank you for listening. Visit us online at explorewithrwd.com to discover more about Roger, his photography, podcast, and adventures. Or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Explore with RWD. Remember, we didn't inherit the earth from our parents. We borrow it from our children. May God bless you and yours. Now get outside and go explore. Explore with RWD is produced by Downs Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.